everybody. Thanks for coming out for our final keynote event of the Free Market Institute's Public Speaker Series for the semester. Before I introduce tonight's event, I'll say we have another great lineup scheduled for the fall, and just mention that the first of these will be on September 10th with Mike Munger from Duke University, who will be talking on insights from Adam Smith on the 250th anniversary of the publication of The Wealth of Nations. For tonight's event, it's a great honor to be able to introduce Phil Gramm. I'd also like to thank Carrie Hobbs for helping make tonight's events possible by getting him up here. Appreciate it. Phil Gramm served in the U.S. Congress representing Texas for more than 2 decades, first as the 6th Congressional District Representative to the U.S. House of Representatives, and then later as a senator. His legislative record includes landmark bills like Gramm-Lotto budget, which reduced federal spending and mandated the Reagan tax cuts, and the Gramm-Rowman Act, which placed the first binding constraints on federal spending. As chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, Senator Gramm steered legislation modernizing banking, insurance, and securities law, including amending the 70-year-old Glass-Steagall Act, which allowed banks, securities companies, and insurance companies to affiliate through a financial services holding company. As impressive as his legislative accomplishments are, FMI does not typically invite former politicians to be our lecturers after this series. However, Senator Gramm is a rare politician who is also an accomplished scholar. He earned his PhD in economics from the University of Georgia, and then he taught at Texas A&M University for 12 years. Nobody's perfect. Before he became a member of Congress. He's published numerous articles and books on subjects ranging from private property, monetary theory and policy, to the economics of mineral extraction. His most recent book, co-authored with Don Boudreaux, who by the way was actually on my dissertation committee more than 20 years ago, is The Triumph of Economic Freedom, Debunking the 7 Great Myths of American Capitalism, which hopefully you got your free signed copy on the way in tonight, and is what he's here to talk to us about tonight. Senator Gramm, welcome to Texas Tech.
Let me first say I'm very happy to be here. The ultimate test of a university is not its library or its faculty or even its football team. It's graduates. And 2 of my dearest friends in the world, Carrie Hobbs and Ken Hans, are graduates of Texas Tech University. And I have a very high opinion of them and your great university. And I'm very glad to be here. Let me also say for the older people in the room who might have voted for me, and I'm not going to take a poll here tonight, thank you for giving me the opportunity to represent the greatest state and the greatest country in the history of the world. I'm on my 3rd career. Most people work real hard to have 1 career. I've had 3 great careers. I was a college professor at Texas A&M. I met my wife there. I love my job. The problem was I woke up one day and I had 2 children and I was an adult, and I didn't like what was happening in America. I knew we weren't running out of oil and gas. I wasn't ready to learn to live on less. That wasn't the America I'd signed on for. And so I wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal, and then I testified for the Energy Committee, and before I knew it, I was involved in politics. And when I had decided when I ran for office that when I turned 60, I was going to go on and do something else, and I've been in finance now for 24 years. So I've sort of gone straight for a quarter of a century, and I've overcome having been in public life. I want to talk today about this book, and I want to thank the Center for buying the book and giving it to you, and I want to urge you to read it. I'm very high on the book. And I think it is very important. And I think if you read the introduction, which is only 6 pages, and the first chapter, you'll read the whole book. The book really begins with the question of why people hold different views as to what the role of government in a free society should be. And two sort of extreme examples are obviously me on one hand and Bernie Sanders on the other. Now, Bernie Sanders is smart. Bernie Sanders is not a mean, awful, terrible person. And yet he has totally different views than I have. And so what I have done over a lifetime in academics and business and in finance is sort of tried to look at why people hold the views they hold. And it basically comes down to how do they view the world as working. A big part of that is what has been your life's experience. Now, I don't know Bernie's. I know he grew up in an upper middle class family in Brooklyn, New York. In my case, neither of my parents graduated from high school. My brother was the first person in my extended family of about 1,800 people who ever graduated from high school. So if Bernie was going to convince me that the system was rigged, that it was fixed, that you didn't have a chance, he'd have to get up mighty early in the morning. And not only my life's experience, but everything that I've learned in trying to understand how the world works has convinced me that opportunity is broad-based in America. Now look, it's better to be born rich and beautiful and brilliant. And if you can pull that off, do it. But the point is, as many of you know, being plain and ordinary and normal do not disqualify you in America from achieving whatever you set out to achieve. My mama literally believed that you could win the 100-meter dash in the Olympics if you were willing to pay the price. Now, I came to the conclusion by the time I was about 10 that that was only an approximation of how the world worked, but it was a good approximation. Brilliant and talent get you only so far. Wanting to do it, wanting to be successful, paying the price, learning who you need to be to do what you want to do. That was one set of St. Paul, is I think all effort. And so anyway, the book starts out by looking at what various very thoughtful people have formed people's opinions about the role of government in a free society. And the conclusion I have found in talking to people who disagree with me is that if I had the Republican leader of the Senate and the Democrat leader of the Senate here, and I asked them a series of public policy questions, they would be 180 degrees apart. But if I asked them, what happened during the Industrial Revolution? Did progressive era regulation benefit the economy? Did greed and capitalism cause the Depression? Did trade, international trade, hollow out manufacturing in America after World War II? Did deregulation cause a financial crisis? And then the two contemporary issues the book looks at, poverty and inequality. You would find that they have completely different perceptions about what the history of this country is and about what knowing what happened actually reveals. And so the book sets out to first define the undisputed facts, and then to set out what we call the myth. And the myth is generally conventional wisdom. In almost every chapter, we quote the best-selling high school history textbook and the best-selling college textbook as examples of the myth. And we make the argument for the myth as convincingly as we can. We had 21 different historians and economists read the proofs of this book. And of those 21, 14 thought that we went too far in defending the myth. As one of my friends at the Hoover Institute said, I thought reading the myth that you really believed it. We didn't want to set up a straw man and knock it down. And then we present the facts. Now today, obviously, I can't talk about 7 myths, and I want to be brief because I'd like to answer questions. But I want to talk about the Industrial Revolution. And I want to talk about it because we have a complete, generally, the public has a complete misconception about what happened. But also, we're getting ready to live it again. In fact, every young person in this audience is going to live through something very similar to the Industrial Revolution, and we call it the AI Revolution. So I'm going to be talking about history, but I'm also going to be talking about the future, and not just any future. For many of you here that are students, I'm going to be talking about your future. Now, the Industrial Revolution was the most dramatic event that ever occurred in the history of mankind, and from a secular point of view. And there was one person who clearly saw what was happening and expressed what was happening, and his name was Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx noted that he didn't use the words, but he basically noted that this dramatic change was a wave of creative destruction, as we now describe it in economics. That there was a massive increase in production and progress, but there also was a wave that was sweeping away the economic and political order of the past. As Karl Marx said, capitalism in one generation has created and unleashed more productive power than all the other generations in history combined. But he also noted that it had pitilessly destroyed the old feudalism that bound man to his natural superiors and left the bond between man and man dependent on self-interest and cash payments. Now, it's interesting because today we recognize that self-interest and cash payments is economic freedom. That feudalism was feudalism. The first time people got money wages was in the Industrial Revolution. Before that, largely they worked where they were born in the manner where they were born and grew up. The Industrial Revolution destroyed that system. Now, here are the facts about the revolution, and nobody disputes these facts because they're available in both British statistics and in American statistics. And the Industrial Revolution was the most productive event that ever occurred in the history of mankind on this planet. In Great Britain, in 70 years, income which had not grown for 1,000 years. People that lived like their grandparents in the same dreary, hard-working world with no real progress and no real improvement. And then suddenly, in roughly 1830 in Great Britain, if you plot it out, and I didn't get any slides because I never have them work right when I try to use them, but if I plot it out here, per capita income in the world, and plot it out here time, what happened is this curve of per capita income in the world versus time for 1,000 years was flat. And then in roughly 1830, it turned up and now is going straight up, and it has never ended. It has never ended. Extraordinary. In Great Britain, in 70 years, real wages that had not changed in 1,000 years grew by 130%. Lifespan expanded by 22 years. Literacy, which had been roughly a 50-50 proposition in Britain, by 1900, for all practical purposes, except for people who had mental challenges, everybody in Britain was literate. Before the Industrial Revolution, nobody dreamed that it could ever be possible that you could eliminate abject poverty for 50% of the population. Nobody ever thought that it would be possible that 1 out of every 5 children didn't die before they were 5 years old. The Industrial Revolution changed all that. In America, the changes were biblical. Can you hear me in the back? In America, the changes were of biblical proportions. In 30 years, per capita income in America tripled. The population doubled. Industrial output grew by 800%. Products that were unavailable in 1870 were abundant and cheap in 1900. In an index in Britain that measured the amount of weight on a child 6 years old, measured longevity, measured literacy of women, and general health, doubled in terms of improvement during the Industrial Revolution. Now, those are the facts. Now, let me talk about, and Karl Marx, more than any other person on the planet that I'm aware of, saw that more clearly. But he also saw the destruction. If you lived in a manor house in the country and you were rich and prosperous and you had numerous people working for you, the Industrial Revolution swept that world away. London had a population of 1 million in 1830 and 7 million in 1900. People left the country and came to the city to work in factories. And it decimated the economy of the feudal system of Great Britain. And people resented it. And also, not only would they hurt economically, but if you were standing on the veranda of a manor house and looking across the creek at a hut, it looks romantic. And it's easy to convince yourself, well, the things are wonderful in the country. But then when all of these people moved to the city, for the first time, the landed gentry really saw what poor people looked like. And they didn't like it. And then, with the population growing in the cities and the political power shifting in Parliament, the Corn Laws were repealed. And the Corn Laws banned the import of many staple grains, and so when they were repealed, it was a godsend to the public, but it was economic disaster for the landed gentry. Now we have many of these grievances branded on our heart. And let me just give you an example. Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. I love the book. One of the best-selling books in history. And it's a story about the Industrial Revolution. And it's about a guy named Ebenezer Scrooge, who is hardworking, totally honest, but he's a miser. And every penny he earns, he just reinvests. His partner died, left him his money, which Scrooge reinvested. His nephew, Fred, says, well, Scrooge's money doesn't no good, he doesn't spend it. But Charles Dickens, the author of the book, never thinks if he's not spending his money, if it's not doing him any good, who is it doing good? It was building the railroads. It was building the factories. It was funding the Industrial Revolution, not only in Great Britain, but in America. And when Charles Dickens has the Ghost of Christmas, is it present or future? I don't know. Anyway, he pulls back his gown, and there are these two children. One is ignorance, and one is poverty, and they represent the doom of mankind. Charles Dickens knew only what had happened in the past. In 1843, in December, when that book came out, the only world he knew was looking back. He didn't realize, and he thought the only way poor people can have their lot improved was charity, redistribution. In this case, voluntarily redistributed. But what he didn't understand in 1843 is the curve had already turned up. Poverty and ignorance were going to be eliminated by the Industrial Revolution. So, one revolution, extraordinary progress, but almost everything we know about it is negative. It's also easy for us to look back and see how terrible things were in London in 1900, the overcrowding. But what we don't understand is how bad it was before they came to London. In fact, there's a wonderful quote in the book from a rich family in England about how, because of the factories, they had to give their maids, they had 8 of them, had to give their maids one afternoon off every 2 weeks, or else they would quit and go to the factories. And yet we view these factories as terrible. And it's because the world we live in that was created by the Industrial Revolution is so rich that life in 1880 in Britain or in 1900 in America looks like poverty. Now, somebody told me. Let me just say very briefly about, I'm supposed to be over 6:30, right? Very briefly about AI. Now, you have all heard about AI, and I've written a lot about it, and I would tell you about it, but the plain truth is I don't know anything about it. I'm an expert on it, but I know very little about it. But I know what has happened in the past. And what has happened in the past is we have never had a technology that didn't end up creating more jobs than it destroyed, that didn't end up raising wages and increasing prosperity. So I don't know in the absorption of AI, are jobs going to be destroyed before they're created, or created before they're destroyed? I read every day in the Wall Street Journal about the impact of AI and supposedly people being laid off, but then I look at the facts. Unemployment is at record lows. The number of jobs being created in the very areas where supposedly AI is going to end up destroying jobs are growing. So my guess is with AI, it is going to sweep away many existing jobs and is going to create more and better jobs. And as the cliche now goes, and I'm just talking now to the younger people here, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to somebody who uses it more effectively than you do. And it's a tool that we can learn to use and we can benefit from. And it's a future we shouldn't be afraid of. But it is going to have the same path as the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution started 200 years ago, and despite the clear statistics about its glorious achievements, we still look on it as a terrible period and teach that in history, in high school and college, all over America. The same misperception is going to occur on AI. The negative effect is going to get all the coverage and is going to be written about in the history books. And the positive effects we will simply be able to enjoy. With that, let me stop, and I would be very happy to try to answer any question. I can't move around with this mic, and people have yelled at me so much in my life that I don't hear too good. So if you would, maybe we got a microphone here. Maybe somebody could take you that microphone. This young lady right here is very efficient, and she's going to come get it. And if you got a question, just come out the aisle. She'll bring you the microphone, and you're not going to hurt my feelings. So ask me a question. Giving me a speech will probably hurt my feelings, but asking me a question.
I'll do one get started. So one of the myths that you write about in this book is that deregulation caused the financial crisis of 2008. And that's going to be a topic near and dear to your heart since you were one of the ones sponsoring legislation to deregulate the financial services industry. Could you maybe say something about that?
Yeah, sure. There's nothing like living through history and then reading about it. It's a real experience. What happened is, let me give you the facts, the myth, and then the debunk the myth. The financial crisis occurred because of the huge number of subprime loans that had been made in the country that worked as long as housing prices were rising. And literally millions of people were getting second mortgages that allowed them to continue to make payments as long as prices were rising. But once home prices stopped rising and started falling in 2006 and 2007, people owed more on their house than the house was worth. They threw the keys over their left shoulder and walked out the front door. And 50% of all mortgages that were being made in 2007 were subprime. And those mortgages were held by banks because government counted a mortgage-backed security as being as solid as sovereign debt. So at the time, I was vice chairman of UBS Investment Bank, which was the largest bank in the world and the best capitalized bank. It held $50 billion of subprime mortgages. Any other bank in the world would have gone broke, and it almost went broke. Now, the myth is that you had this massive deregulation and that you had all this speculative lending and that it needed to be fixed by having the government regulate financial institutions more tightly. That was the myth. And the whole thing broke during a presidential election, which made any kind of reasonable debate about it impossible. But what really happened is when President Clinton ran for office, he ran on a very radical platform that everybody forgets of using pension funds to fund things that would be in the public interest. And when he was elected, not even the unions were willing to let the government mess around with their pension funds, even though they strongly supported the president. And so he turned to HUD, Housing and Urban Development, to implement his policy by basically putting pressure on banks to make subprime loans to expand housing. And he did it through the Community Reinvestment Act, which you couldn't even open a teller machine if you didn't pass the test, and you didn't pass tests if you didn't make subprime mortgages. Banks held the mortgages because in rating their capital, the government rated mortgage-backed securities equivalent to sovereign debt. And the Freddie and Fannie, the housing agencies, were first required to buy 26% of all their mortgages subprime. By the end, it was 56 cents out of every dollar had to be purchasing and securitizing subprime mortgages. So when the thing finally exploded, the reality was this was a crisis created in government housing policy with the good intention of having more Americans own their own home. It was forced on the banking system. It was forced on Freddie and Fannie. And when the system failed, of course, you're not going to blame government. You're going to blame the private sector. And that's basically what happened. But I was there, I saw it. I remember I was working for UBS in New York, and I had seen an article in The Economist that gave me information I didn't have, and that was that we were up to almost 50% of the new mortgages being made that were subprime. And so I called Alan Greenspan and said, "Are you aware of this?" He said, "Yeah, I've looked at it, and it's troubling, but we think that it's so that the mortgage market is not big enough to send the economy into a spiral." But the problem was the banks were holding the thing, and it destroyed their financial base. And that's where it all came from. Yes, sir.
Okay, let's jump the hook with some questions. I want to hear you talk more about all of these, but I had to pick one. So I picked one that is, I don't know, just seems to get more media attention these days, and that's the income inequality issue. I'd like to know what the myth is there, what unequal compared to what, and my sense always was that this was kind of an economics scarcity question. There aren't very many people capable of doing jobs that command massive dollars, et cetera, et cetera. But I just wonder what that myth is, and why it's not true.
Well, let me respond in two ways. First of all, much of the inequality that we debate is from a bad statistic in the federal government. The Census Bureau, in measuring household income, made a decision in 1947 to count only cash and cash equivalent payments. And in 1947, there were virtually no fringe benefits. A few people had hospitalization insurance, but not many. And all welfare payments were made in cash. But when the war on poverty came in 1965, every program was a payment in kind. Food stamps. You got a debit card, you can go to the grocery store and buy your food, but you don't get cash, and the Census Bureau of the United States does not count food stamps as income to people who get food stamps. The Census Bureau does not count Medicaid as income to people who get Medicaid, so that now you go to the hospital, you go to the doctor, you have no co-payment, and the government pays your bill, but it doesn't count as part of your income. Housing subsidies, where the government pays your rent, do not count as part of your income. Well, 70% of the income of middle-income Americans is spent on those three things. Today, the poverty rate is about $27,000. But if you add up all the payments that are made to poor people in America, it adds up to, when you count the 36% who actually work, it adds up to an average income of $77,000. $77,000. So the Census Bureau says the ratio of the top 20% of Americans to the income of the bottom 20% of Americans is 16.7 to 1. But if you count taxes where government takes your money, and you count transfer payments where it gives you money, the ratio is 4 to 1, not 16.7 to 1. Now, you can say 4 to 1 is too much, but it's a very different debate than 16.7 to 1. That's the first point. The second point is the whole debate about inequality is still based on the implicit assumption that for somebody to get something, it means it was taken from you. Plato in the Republic talks about how unstable democracy was because of the ability of people to gain power by redistributing income. When he wrote the Republic, Athens was a city-state and wealth was basically land ownership, and so it was a zero-sum world. That doesn't apply to the world we live in. Piketty, you've heard of Thomas Piketty, a socialist from France. If you look at his book, in measuring income inequality, he doesn't count any government transfer payments as income, any, including Social Security and the payments I forget what the other one is. Forgive me, I'm old. He doesn't count any of those payments, none. And then for the higher income people, he doesn't count income taxes that they pay as income lost. And then he does a big bait and switch. And the bait and switch is he doesn't use the real income. He makes up what their income would be if they sold everything they owned every year and paid taxes every year. So you read the expose about ProPublica, about how Bill Gates and Warren Buffett paid so little in taxes. When we got their data, what they did, somebody stole the tax returns. And it appears they took the actual taxes paid, but instead of taking their income, they estimated what Warren Buffett's income would have been had he sold every asset he owned every year and paid taxes on it. And then finally, he's got this thing where he never says people earn income. They took it, they seized it, they got it, but they never earned it. And he compares the top 1/10 of 1% to everybody else. 141,000 people to everybody else. And the final point about inequality is, and let me just take an example I was talking about today. Elon Musk. I have a young wife who wants money and would put me in a cheap nursing home if I tried to quit. And so I had to have an internet. And so the company I work for paid all this money to run all these wires through my attic, and it never worked very well. Elon Musk comes along, and he's got a little satellite about that big, and it costs 1/10 of what the old system cost. And so I have it screwed into the corner of my house, and it works 3 times as good. So Elon Musk is really rich. But am I poor because he's rich? I'm richer because he's rich. He helped enrich me. So how am I in any way diminished by the fact that he's the richest guy in the world? I don't get it. Warren Buffett, the greatest investor in history, has improved the pension funds of everybody in this room. There's not anybody in this room that has a private pension fund that doesn't own a part of Google, for example. So how are we poor because people that run Google are rich? I'm richer because of Google. It was up 10% last week. I was feeling much richer, at least for a day, and then I figured, well, no one telling what'll happen tomorrow. The point being, there is inequality in America, but it is nowhere near as big as our official statistics show. And with regard to the welfare we pay, when we started the war on poverty, 78% of all able-bodied poor people worked. Today it's down to 36%. Now, I think they're worse off because they're not working. I don't think life is good just sitting around doing nothing. I think the idle hands of the devil's workshop. I don't retire, I lied, I don't have a young wife, and she would love for me to retire. It's just, I love my dogs, but I don't want to sit on the front porch and pet them all day. So anyway, I've said more about the subject than I should have. Yes?
Thank you for coming to share your perspective with us.
Get it closer now.
U.S. national debt is now pushing $40 trillion, and recently we had the distinction of exceeding our annual GDP. I've got 3 kids in their 20s and 30s, and I'm embarrassed a little bit for what we're leaving for them and for a lot of the students in this room. Can you tell us what we should or shouldn't fear about the national debt?
Yeah, can you repeat the question to me?
I was asking about the national debt.
Oh, the national debt, yeah. Well, you don't go broke because of the size of your debt. You go broke when you either can't pay interest on it, or people begin to question your willingness to pay interest on it. And we're going to have, unfortunately, a come to Jesus moment when it is my guess that our foreign creditors and domestic creditors begin to question whether we're actually going to service his debt or not. And when that happens, we're going to be forced to make some tough decisions. Now, the good news is we don't have a problem we can't fix. The bad news is it's not going to be easy, and the politicians that have to fix it are going to do many things that aren't going to be popular. But I was in Congress when Social Security went broke in 1983. And we raised the retirement age. And we raised the retirement age from 65 to 67. We should have raised the minimum retirement age from 62 to 65. We didn't. And people understood that we had to make changes. We're going to have to do that again. People are living longer. Now, we're not going to do it to people who we say somebody was going to retire in 5 years. Well, we changed the game on you. But 20 years out, we've got to begin. We're living longer, we're healthier. People are going to have to work longer. And, you know, I guess I feel, because I survived politics, you can tell people the truth. They may not like it, but they have a way of judging you and what you're trying to do. I just hope we have somebody like Ronald Reagan in office when we have to do it the next time, because it made a difference. He sat down with Tip O'Neill and worked out an agreement, and we did it. Any student got a question?
I got a question.
Oh, here we go. All right.
My name is Kyle Wilson. I'm a student of Professor Walter. And I just wonder, because you've seen a lot more than me, a lot more of these economic waves and everything, I wonder if you still believe in like the American dream and hard work pays off, especially for our generation of students. And you were talking about AI earlier, and I wonder how that would incorporate into that as well.
Well, the American dream is still out there if you're willing to work for it. And I remember one, I was pulling weeds with my older brother in the front yard. And I said to him, Don, wouldn't it have been great if we lived in the olden times? And so being an older brother, he looked at me like I was a moron and said, what would have been good about the olden times? I said, I'd been to the movie and seen this movie, Ivanhoe, which was about the feudal era. And I said, well, if we lived in the olden times, there'd been servants out here pulling these weeds. That's what would have been good. And so he said to me, don't you realize if we lived in the olden times, we would have been the servants. We live in the greatest time, in the greatest place in history, he told me. And I've never forgotten it. And so do you. So there's plenty of opportunity out there, and AI is going to create opportunity. Now, if you want to do it the same old way you've always done it, it's probably going to disrupt your life. But if you're willing to change and grow and learn, you can do it. And I remember when I got into politics, God, I was so terrible. I felt uncomfortable going up to people I didn't know and glad-handing them and kissing babies and stuff. But I wanted to change America, and I had to learn how to be a politician to do it. And I did. I became a good politician. And you can learn whatever you need to be if you're willing to pay the price. So there's going to be plenty of opportunity in America, but it'll mostly go to people who want to be successful and are willing to pay the price. And the question is, are you one of those people?
Senator Gramm, the thing that that bothers me the most about our current era, and what faces our students and young people, like my son and grandsons, are that government is our biggest problem. It has created such overspending that we have run up this massive debt, and then we're facing a social security crisis within the next 7 or 8 years, if there's no recession, which is kind of an impossibility to think about. And we are going to be faced with another crisis like in the Reagan era, when we had double Social Security taxes as well as extending the retirement ages. And we're faced with the problem that we also then have the Fed, which loves to print money for these subprime mortgages and all the other boondoggles that government has gotten us involved in the last 100 years or so. What's your thoughts on bringing the Fed really under control? I think that's what needs to be regulated, not private enterprise so much.
I blame the Fed for the recent inflation. They panicked during the pandemic. I'm kind of understanding a little more than most people because we didn't really know what the pandemic was at the beginning. But the last thing I want to do is for the government, the Congress, and the president to control printing money. My God, there would be no end to it. So I want an independent Fed, and I do believe, since I know the new head of the Fed, that even though President Trump would very much like to tell the Fed to just lower interest rates, that he picked the guy of the group he was considering that is the least likely to do that. So I think that'll all come out. It is true that we face a lot of problems today, and they look big as compared to problems we've had in the past, but we've never had the resources to deal with them that we have now. And I'm optimistic because I lived through a dramatic change. When I went to Congress, the inflation rate was 13.5%. Prime interest rates were 21.5%. 10.2% of the people were unemployed, the highest since the Depression. And the Soviet Union was on the march all over the world. 25 years later, we were in a period of 40 years of price stability. The economy was booming. The Soviet Union was on the ash heap of history. It shows you things can be changed. And I think and now I'm just going to talk to old people like me. I find that as you get older, there's this natural tendency to think because you're wearing down, that the world is wearing down. And I think there's a tendency to believe, and I admit guilt in this, I often fear whether or not I lived in a golden age. I often fear whether I was born in 1942, and in the America I grew up in, you couldn't fail without working at it. You could not, you had to make a mistake after mistake after mistake. America gave you a second chance over and over and over. I sometimes wonder if that was this unique period we live in, which I'm very grateful for, or whether it's just a characteristic of America. And we'll never know until we get to the future what the reality is. But my guess is there's plenty of opportunity out there, and there are people that out there that can and will solve these problems. But I've got 5 grandchildren, so it's a thing I think about. Again, it's their world, they want to make the decisions, and that's the way it works. it's a great honor to be here, and I really appreciate it. And I really admire your center here that's studying and promoting American capitalism. And we got one final question. Yes, sir.
One last one, Senator, kind of addressing the deficit issue. We talked about Social Security. Tell us your thoughts on fixing the other big part of that problem, Medicare.
Well, look, fixing Social Security is child's play. Fixing Medicare is much harder. I once was trying to bring co-payments to Medicare in areas like home health care for higher income people. And I was in a debate in the House against a guy named Claude Pepper, who was greatly beloved by old people. And so I said to him, you know, I'm talking about having a co-payment for home health care. And so Claude Pepper says, well, Mr. Gramm, I understand that these old people, these 85-year-old women. And I said, well, Mr. Pepper, they're 85 years old, but they're not poor. That's people I'm talking about. So I get my telephone. There are telephones in the lobby for members of Congress. So the girl comes out and says, she's got someone on the phone. So I go get on the phone. It's my mother. And my mother said, wasn't that sweet Mr. Pepper's talking? Why don't you sit down and shut up? It is very hard. Medicare is, about 50% of Medicare is funded by the Medicare taxes you pay. The other is funded by general revenues. We basically have gotten into a situation where once you're sick, you pay no attention to the cost or your options. And as I once said in debating the subject, if I bought medical care, if I bought groceries the way I buy medical care, I would eat differently, and so would my dog. We have got to find a way to get people to pay attention to the cost of health care and make rational decisions. And we've made some success in some areas, but Medicare is going to be very difficult to deal with. Medicaid is hard to deal with, but there you're giving it to people. You've got many people in the country who figure they earn Medicare, when the reality is no one's ever paid more than half the cost. And so, again, and I know the solution that many people have is to let the government take it over. In fact, I killed the Clinton health care bill, which was socialized medicine. And when I was walking off the floor of the Senate, Ted Kennedy came up, put his arm around me and said, you're on the wrong side of history. We're going to have socialized medicine in America. And I said, well, Ted, you're probably right, but, you know, I'm going to die too, but I'm hoping I don't do it today. And it ain't ever going to happen as long as I'm here, I told him. And it didn't. But the last thing we want to do is turn this thing over to the government. We've got to find a way to preserve our freedom in something as important as health care. And it's a very tough issue. But again, you got all these young people being educated, we're spending money on them. It's their job to come up with a solution. I want to leave just a little for them to do. And again, thank you all very much.